My name is Hattie, and I am 65 years old, a retired nurse who once lost everything in a messy divorce. Today, I live in a beautiful beach house in Malibu that I worked hard to buy after years of struggle. It had been 11 years since anyone in my family invited me to any event, but that changed when my daughter and son-in-law suddenly appeared on my doorstep. The look on their faces when I opened the door and greeted them calmly spoke volumes about their true intentions. If you're watching this from a place where you've also felt the sting of family rejection, give this video a like and subscribe to hear how I turned my pain into power. Let me know where you're watching from. I grew up in a small Connecticut town, the kind where everybody knows your business before you do. My childhood was simple but happy. My parents weren't wealthy, but they taught me the value of hard work and perseverance. Those lessons would prove invaluable later in my life, though I had no idea just how much I would need them. I met Harold during nursing school. He was studying to become a doctor, and we crossed paths in the hospital cafeteria. I still remember that day. I spilled coffee on my white uniform, and he offered me his lab coat. It was a whirlwind romance that swept me off my feet. Harold was charming, ambitious, and seemed to adore me. Within a year we were married, and I was so certain I had found my happily ever after. Shortly after Harold completed his residency and began working as a surgeon, I gave birth to our daughter Stephanie. She was the most beautiful baby I had ever seen, with her father's deep blue eyes and my auburn hair. Our family seemed picture perfect: the successful doctor, the dedicated nurse, and our precious daughter. We moved to a large house in an upscale neighborhood, and from the outside, it looked like we were living the American dream. While Harold's career flourished, I continued working as a nurse, though I scaled back to part-time after Stephanie was born. I wanted to be present for her childhood milestones. I was the one who attended parent-teacher conferences, took her to dance lessons, and nursed her through childhood illnesses. Harold was often absent, citing the demands of his surgical practice, but I made excuses for him, telling Stephanie that her daddy was out saving lives. As Harold's reputation as a skilled surgeon grew, so did our wealth. We took lavish vacations, joined the country club, and moved to an even larger house. But looking back, I can see that as our bank account expanded, the emotional connection between us diminished. Harold became increasingly critical of me, making snide comments about my appearance, questioning my intelligence, and dismissing my career as just nursing. Stephanie grew up watching this dynamic, and it affected her relationship with both of us. Harold spoiled her excessively, perhaps out of guilt for his absence, while simultaneously undermining my authority as her mother. "Don't listen to your mother," he would say when I tried to set boundaries. "She doesn't understand how special you are." It hurt, but I told myself that at least Stephanie had a father who adored her. When Stephanie left for college, I hoped she would gain some perspective on our family dynamics. Instead, she met Tyler during her sophomore year, and they became engaged after just 6 months of dating. Tyler came from a wealthy family and had political ambitions. I had reservations about the speed of their relationship, but Harold was delighted. "He's exactly the kind of son-in-law we want," he declared, though I couldn't help noticing the way Tyler seemed to look through me rather than at me during family gatherings. The wedding was extravagant, costing over $100,000. Though Harold and I were divorced by then, I contributed the majority of the funds, while Harold made a minimal contribution despite having walked away with most of our assets. I did it for Stephanie, wanting her day to be perfect, even as I struggled financially after the divorce. The first signs of real trouble came during the wedding planning. Harold used every opportunity to whisper poisonous thoughts about me to Stephanie. "Your mother always was terrible with money," he would say within her earshot. "Be careful not to let her ruin your special day with her controlling behavior." I tried to ignore these comments, focusing instead on creating a beautiful wedding for my daughter. After Stephanie and Tyler married, she began pulling away from me. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. When I was invited to family gatherings during those first few years, I was treated like a distant acquaintance rather than Stephanie's mother. I would sit alone at holiday dinners while Harold held court, telling embellished stories about his surgical prowess and making not-so-subtle digs at my expense. I endured this treatment because I wanted to remain in Stephanie's life. But looking back, I realize I was teaching her that it was acceptable to treat me with disrespect. Sometimes love blinds us to the painful truth right in front of our eyes. The day I discovered Harold's affair remains etched in my memory. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and I had stopped by the hospital to bring him dinner during his late shift. Instead, I found him in his office with a younger doctor, her blouse unbuttoned and his hand on her thigh. When he saw me, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he said, "Well, this saves me the trouble of telling you later." The divorce that followed was brutal. Harold had apparently been planning for this eventuality for years. He had hidden assets, transferred money to offshore accounts, and cultivated relationships with all the best divorce attorneys in our area, so that I would be left with limited options for legal representation. The lawyer I finally found was inexperienced compared to Harold's team. They painted me as a gold digger, despite the fact that I had supported him through medical school and worked throughout our marriage. The judge, a golf buddy of Harold's, ruled largely in his favor. I lost our family home, most of our savings, and was awarded minimal alimony despite our 30-year marriage. At 53, I found myself moving from our 5-bedroom house to a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. The walls were thin, the plumbing unreliable, and the neighborhood unsafe. I would lie awake at night, listening to arguments from the apartment next door, wondering how my life had taken such a drastic turn. Financial necessity forced me to return to full-time nursing, plus picking up extra shifts whenever possible. My body ached from the long hours on my feet, but I had no choice. Bills needed to be paid, and I had to rebuild some semblance of financial security from the ashes of my previous life. Throughout this devastating period, I expected Stephanie to at least check on me occasionally. Instead, she fully embraced her father's version of events. "Dad says you're just bitter because he found happiness," she told me during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "He says you never supported his career and that you're trying to punish him for being successful." The first major family event I wasn't invited to was Stephanie's baby shower. I found out about it through a coworker whose daughter followed Stephanie on social media. Seeing the photos online, Harold proudly standing beside Stephanie, his arm around his new wife, who was at least 20 years younger than me, everyone smiling as they celebrated the impending arrival of my first grandchild, was a pain unlike anything I had experienced before. I tried to reach out to Stephanie afterward, sending a handwritten letter congratulating her and expressing my desire to be part of my grandchild's life. Her response was a brief text. "Mom, let's not make this about you. Dad and Melanie hosted a beautiful shower, and you would have just made things awkward." That text message marked the beginning of my systematic exclusion from family events. The pattern had been established, and it would continue for 11 long years. Over the 11 years that followed, I missed countless family milestones. The birth of my 3 grandchildren, Emma, Jack, and Lily, each one coming into the world without their grandmother present. I learned their names through social media and glimpsed their faces growing and changing through photos posted by distant acquaintances who didn't realize the pain these images caused me. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, I would prepare myself for an invitation that never came. I established my own traditions, volunteering at the hospital during holidays so other nurses with functional families could be home with their loved ones. The patients became my temporary family, and their gratitude warmed my heart, even as it ached for what I had lost. Birthdays were particularly difficult. On Stephanie's birthday each year, I would send a card and a thoughtful gift choosing items that reflected my memories of her childhood preferences. A first edition copy of her favorite book, a delicate necklace similar to one her grandmother had given her. These packages were returned unopened, sometimes with "Return to Sender" scrawled across them in what I recognized as Tyler's handwriting. My attempts to establish contact followed a pattern: hope, effort, rejection, and grief. I left voicemails that went unanswered. I sent emails that received no reply. Once I even drove by their house, hoping to catch a glimpse of my grandchildren playing in the yard. Instead, I saw Stephanie notice my car and quickly usher the children inside, closing the blinds with a finality that spoke volumes. Social media became both a blessing and a curse. Through mutual connections, I could occasionally see photos from family gatherings, birthday parties, dance recitals, Little League games. In each image, there was a space where I should have been a grandmother's role, filled by Harold's young wife or Tyler's mother. I knew I was being erased from the family narrative, replaced by women who fit better into the image Stephanie and Tyler wanted to project. The emotional toll of this rejection was immense. Depression crept in slowly, then all at once. There were days I couldn't get out of bed when the weight of loss felt too heavy to bear. My performance at work suffered, and my supervisor, concerned rather than punitive, suggested I speak with a therapist. Dr. Lena Parker became my lifeline. A compassionate woman in her 60s, she helped me process my grief and anger. What you're experiencing, she explained during one session, is ambiguous loss, grieving people who are still alive but absent from your life. It's one of the most challenging forms of grief because there's no closure. Through therapy, I joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children. Meeting others who understood my pain was transformative. Janet, whose son had cut contact after marrying a controlling wife. Robert, whose daughters had been poisoned against him by their mother during a bitter custody battle. Diana, whose children had estranged themselves when she remarried after their father's death. We shared our stories, offered each other comfort, and slowly learned to find joy despite our losses. The group taught me that while I couldn't control Stephanie's choices, I could control my response to them. I could choose to remain trapped in grief, or I could build a life that brought me fulfillment independently of my role as a mother and grandmother. It was a painful realization that perhaps the healthiest path forward was to stop trying to reconnect with people who had made it clear they didn't want me in their lives. The last message I sent Stephanie was simple: I will always love you and be here if you ever want to reconnect. The door remains open. Then I began the difficult process of focusing entirely on myself and my future. The decision to invest in my financial education came from an unexpected source. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I collapsed into tears in the hospital break room. A fellow nurse named Margaret, a woman in her 60s, with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes, sat beside me and listened as I poured out my story. "Hattie," she said when I had finished, "you've given everything to people who didn't appreciate you. Maybe it's time to invest in yourself." Margaret, as it turned out, had built significant wealth through careful investing, despite her modest nursing salary. She offered to lend me some books on financial literacy and invited me to join her for coffee to discuss basic investment strategies. I began with small steps, reading financial books during my lunch breaks, taking free online courses about investing, watching YouTube videos on building wealth. The learning curve was steep, and there were moments I felt overwhelmed by terms like diversification, capital gains, and dividend yields. But I persisted, driven by a desire to secure my future on my own terms. My first investment was modest, just $1,000 in a pharmaceutical company, whose new arthritis medication I had seen transforming patients' lives in the hospital. I had to work 5 extra shifts to save that money, but watching it grow over the following months ignited something in me, a sense of control I hadn't felt since before the divorce. Margaret became more than a mentor. She became my closest friend. Every Sunday, we would meet at a small cafe to review my investment portfolio and discuss potential opportunities. Unlike Harold, who had always made me feel intellectually inferior, Margaret encouraged my questions and celebrated my growing financial acumen. As my confidence grew, so did my investment strategy. I began allocating a larger portion of my salary to investments, living frugally in my small apartment, so I could build wealth for the future. I brought lunches from home, shopped at thrift stores, and found free ways to entertain myself, hiking in nearby parks, borrowing books from the library, attending free community concerts. During my breaks at the hospital, I studied market trends on my phone. I became particularly interested in healthcare and technology, stock sectors I understood from my work and saw the future potential in. I joined investment forums online, absorbing knowledge from more experienced investors, while carefully avoiding get-rich-quick schemes. My breakthrough came 5 years into my investment journey when I put $10,000, nearly all my available capital at the time, into a startup developing revolutionary telemedicine software. The company was later acquired by a major tech corporation, turning my investment into over $300,000, almost overnight. This windfall allowed me to diversify more broadly and take more calculated risks with a portion of my portfolio. I continued working as a nurse but reduced my hours slightly to have more time for managing my investments. By the time I was 62, my portfolio had grown to a point where early retirement became a realistic option. The decision to buy the beach house in Malibu came after careful consideration. The property market had dipped temporarily, creating an opportunity to purchase at $2.5 million what would normally cost significantly more. The house wasn't just an indulgence, it was an investment in a prime location likely to appreciate over time. Moving to Malibu opened a new chapter in my life. I quickly formed connections with my neighbors, many of them creative professionals or retirees like myself. Joanna, a retired literature professor 2 doors down, started a book club that became the highlight of my month. Carlos and his husband David, both architects who lived across the street, often invited me for dinner on their rooftop terrace overlooking the ocean. I found purpose through volunteer work at a local clinic that served uninsured patients. My nursing skills were still valuable, and mentoring younger healthcare workers gave me the sense of legacy I'd been denied through family connection. For the first time in decades, I was truly happy. My house became a haven, light-filled rooms with ocean views, a garden where I grew herbs and flowers, a deck where I would sit with my morning coffee, watching dolphins play in the waves. I had created a beautiful life from the ashes of rejection, proving to myself, if to no one else, that I was worthy of love, success, and joy. I thought often of Stephanie and my grandchildren, but the sharp pain had dulled to a gentle ache. I had photos of them discreetly placed throughout my home, images gathered from public social media posts, and sometimes I would speak to them in my mind, telling my grandchildren about their grandmother and the life she had built. It wasn't what I had once dreamed of, but it was a life of dignity, independence, and quiet triumph. The Wednesday morning they arrived started like any other. I was in my garden pruning my rose bushes and enjoying the gentle ocean breeze when the doorbell rang. Thinking it might be the package I was expecting, I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and made my way to the front door. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight of Stephanie and Tyler standing on my doorstep. My daughter, Maus, now 43, but looked like an older version of the young woman who had gradually slipped away from me. Tyler stood slightly behind her, his once boyish face now showing the lines of middle age, his eyes darting past me to assess the interior of my home. "Mom," Stephanie said, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness, Surprise! I maintained my composure though my heart was racing. Stephanie, Tyler, this is unexpected. Their eyes widened as they took in the marble foyer and the ocean view visible through the windows beyond. I could almost see the calculations happening behind Tyler's eyes as he noted the expensive furnishings and prime location. May we come in? Stephanie asked, already stepping forward without waiting for my response. I led them to the living room where floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Pacific Ocean. The shock on their faces as they took in my circumstances was almost comical. For 11 years, they had likely imagined me in my small apartment struggling financially while they enjoyed prosperity in the shadow of Harold's wealth. Your home is impressive, Tyler said, running his hand along the back of my Italian leather sofa. Real estate in Malibu must have cost a fortune. I've made some good investments, I replied simply. Stephanie wandered to the windows. So, this is what you've been doing all this time? There was an accusation in her tone, as though my success somehow constituted a betrayal. I wondered briefly what narrative they had constructed to justify their years of exclusion. Perhaps that I was wallowing in self-pity, desperately needing their help, but too proud to ask for it. Would you like some tea? I offered, maintaining the politeness that had been ingrained in me since childhood. Over tea on the terrace, Stephanie made a half-hearted attempt at apology. We've been meaning to reach out for a while now, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Life just gets so busy, you know. I nodded, though I wanted to ask if busy really explained 11 years of returned gifts and ignored messages. Tyler steered the conversation toward the house again. So, when did you buy this place? Must be recently. Last we heard you were still in that apartment. I purchased it 3 years ago, I replied. Would you like a tour? As I showed them through the 4-bedroom house with its gourmet kitchen, home office, and private beach access, their interest became increasingly transparent. Tyler asked about the property values in the area, while Stephanie commented repeatedly on how lucky I was. Neither asked about my life in any meaningful way, how I spent my time, whether I had friends nearby, what brought me joy. I prepared lunch, and as we ate on the terrace, the first mention of their financial situation emerged. Tyler complained about the ridiculous property taxes on their home, while Stephanie lamented the cost of private school for their children. I listened, offering sympathetic noises, while noting how they had yet to ask a single question about me. So, Stephanie said, finally setting down her water glass with deliberate care, we actually came to see you for a specific reason. I assumed as much, I replied calmly. She glanced at Tyler, who gave her an encouraging nod. The thing is, Mom, we're going through a really tough time financially. Tyler's law firm has been struggling since one of the partners embezzled funds. We're at risk of losing our house. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I genuinely was thinking of my grandchildren whose stability might be threatened. We've exhausted all our options, Tyler interjected. We've taken out second and third mortgages borrowed from friends, even asked Harold for help. And Harold couldn't assist, I asked, already knowing the answer from their presence at my door. Stephanie's expression hardened. Dad says he's having his own financial issues, though he and Melanie still managed to take a cruise to the Bahamas last month. I see. So we were hoping, Tyler continued, his voice taking on the smooth persuasiveness I remembered from his courtroom days, that given your obvious financial success, you might be willing to help family in need. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked, though I already knew. We need $300,000 to catch up on our mortgage and pay off some pressing debts, Tyler said, as casually as if requesting to borrow a cup of sugar. Obviously, it would be a loan. We'd pay you back as soon as Tyler's firm recovers. Stephanie reached across the table and placed her hand on mine, the first physical contact between us in over a decade. Think about the kids, Mom, your grandchildren. Emma is 16 now, Jack is 14, and Lily just turned 10. They need stability. And there it was. The first mention of my grandchildren deployed not to rebuild a relationship, but as emotional leverage in a financial transaction. The grandchildren I had never been allowed to know were suddenly being used as pawns. I looked into my daughter's eyes, searching for the little girl who once ran to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting that I could fix anything. Instead, I saw a stranger who viewed me not as a mother, but as a potential solution to a financial problem. "I'll need to think about it," I said, maintaining my calm exterior, while my heart ached anew. Stephanie's face fell slightly, but Tyler quickly recovered. "Of course. Take your time. But our situation is quite urgent. Perhaps we could stay here tonight and discuss it further in the morning." The audacity was breathtaking. From 11 years of silence to inviting themselves to stay in my home in the span of a single afternoon. I wondered if they had even considered what they would have done if they'd arrived to find me still living in my modest apartment without the means to solve their problems. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I replied. "I have plans this evening." The disappointment and calculation on their faces told me everything I needed to know about the true purpose of their sudden reappearance in my life. "So, let me make sure I understand correctly," I said, setting my glass of water down carefully on the coffee table. "After 11 years of no contact, 11 birthdays, 11 Christmases, countless milestones, you appear at my door because you need money." Stephanie flinched. "That's not fair, Mom. We've been busy with the kids and busy for 11 years. I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. Too busy to return a phone call. Too busy to allow me to meet my grandchildren, even once. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Hattie, the past is the past. We're here now because we're family and families help each other." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Family, is that what we are? Because from where I'm sitting it looks like I'm a bank you've suddenly remembered exists." "Mom, please." Stephanie's eyes filled with tears that once would have broken my heart and made me capitulate immediately. "We made mistakes. We got caught up in Dad's version of events. He told us you abandoned him, that you tried to ruin him financially during the divorce." "And you never once thought to hear my side?" I asked. "In 11 years, it never occurred to you that there might be another perspective?" Tyler leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "The kids really want to meet you. Emma especially has been asking about her grandmother. If you helped us through this rough patch, you could be part of their lives." And there it was, the threat beneath the request. My access to my grandchildren was being offered as a transaction contingent on financial support. "So, if I understand correctly," I said, "if I give you $300,000, I get to see my grandchildren. And if I don't—" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I built this life from nothing," I said, gesturing to the home around us. "After your father took almost everything in the divorce, I worked double shifts. I lived in an apartment where the heat failed every winter. I taught myself investing. I made sacrifices you can't imagine to rebuild at an age when most people are thinking about retirement." "We didn't know," Stephanie began. "You didn't ask," I corrected her. "You didn't call. You returned my gifts. You excluded me from every significant event in your lives." Tyler's patience was wearing thin. "Look, are you going to help us or not? Because if this is just going to be a guilt trip down memory lane—" "Did you know your father declared bankruptcy last year?" Stephanie interrupted, a vindictive gleam in her eye. That caught me by surprise. "Harold bankrupt?" Stephanie nodded, seeming pleased to have gained the upper hand. His young wife had expensive tastes, and he made some bad investments trying to impress her. Then she left him for her personal trainer. He's living in a condo now and driving a Hyundai instead of his precious Mercedes. Despite everything, I felt no joy at Harold's downfall. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said honestly. Sorry? After what he did to you? Stephanie looked genuinely confused. Bitterness is a poison you drink yourself hoping the other person will die, I replied. I let go of my anger toward your father years ago. Well, he never let go of his anger toward you, Stephanie said. He told us horrible things, that you cheated on him, that you were mentally unstable, that you'd try to turn us against him if we gave you the chance. And you believed him, I stated simply. He's our father. Stephanie's voice rose. Why wouldn't we believe him? I'm your mother, I replied softly. Why didn't that count for anything? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken recriminations and painful truths. Tyler looked at his watch, clearly growing impatient with a conversation that wasn't progressing toward his financial goals. Here's what I'm willing to do, I said finally. I won't give you a loan of $300,000. Tyler stood abruptly. Well, this has been a waste of time. Come on, Stephanie. However, I continued unperturbed by his reaction. I am willing to help in other ways. I can recommend financial advisors who specialize in debt restructuring. I can connect you with attorneys who might help with your firm's situation, Tyler. And if necessary, I could assist with the grandchildren's educational expenses directly. We don't need your advice, Tyler snapped. We need capital. And I need to know that any help I provide will actually benefit my grandchildren, I replied. Not be used to maintain a lifestyle beyond your means. Stephanie stood now too, her face flushed with anger. This is exactly why we stopped including you in our lives. You always think you know better than everyone else. You're controlling and judgmental, just like Dad said. I remained seated, refusing to match their emotional escalation. I understand you're disappointed, but after 11 years of silence, you can't expect me to simply hand over money without any consideration for how it will be used. You'll never see the kids now, Tyler said, the threat explicit this time. You had your chance to be a grandmother and you chose your money over your family. No, I corrected him gently. You chose money over family the moment you decided I was only worth contacting when you needed financial help. They left in a fury of slammed doors and squealing tires, leaving me alone in the beautiful home I had worked so hard to create. As the sound of their car faded, I picked up my phone and called Margaret. They came for money, I said when she answered. Of course they did. Margaret replied, her voice a balm to my wounded spirit. Are you okay? No. I admitted allowing myself honesty with this woman who had become more family to me than my blood relations. But I will be. As I looked out at the ocean, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Renewed grief for the relationship I had lost, anger at being viewed as nothing more than a potential solution to financial problems, but also a surprising sense of peace. I had stood my ground with dignity rather than allowing myself to be used. The next morning, I was surprised to receive an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Hi, Grandma." It was from Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, writing to me without her parents' knowledge. I found your email online, she wrote. I've always wondered about you. Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing this, but I want to know who you are beyond their stories. Maybe we could talk sometime. As tears blurred my vision, I realized that perhaps the door to a relationship with at least one of my grandchildren wasn't completely closed after all. The days following Stephanie and Tyler's visit were emotionally turbulent. I fluctuated between certainty that I had made the right decision and nagging doubt that perhaps I should have given them the money as a way back into my grandchildren's lives. Hadn't I promised myself years ago that I would do anything to be part of their world again? You're second-guessing yourself, Dr. Parker said during our next therapy session. That's natural. But ask yourself this: if you had given them the money, would it have led to a genuine relationship? Or would you have become an ATM they visited whenever they needed funds? Her question helped clarify my thinking. The relationship Stephanie and Tyler had offered wasn't one built on love or respect. It was transactional. That wasn't the foundation I wanted for reconnecting with my family. I began processing my emotions through journaling, a practice Dr. Parker had recommended years earlier. Each morning, I would sit on my terrace overlooking the ocean and write about my feelings, the renewed grief, the anger, but also the unexpected strength I had found in standing firm. I didn't give them money. I wrote one morning, not because I don't love them, but because I respect myself too much to be used. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's exploitation. Emma and I continued corresponding via email. I was careful not to criticize her parents or ask invasive questions about the family. Instead, I shared stories about my life, asked about her interests, and gradually built a tentative bridge across the years of separation. "I'm into photography," she wrote in one email, attaching several impressive landscape shots. "Dad wants me to focus on more practical subjects, but this is what I love." I responded with encouragement and a book on photography techniques I ordered online and had sent to her friend's house to avoid detection by Stephanie and Tyler. Our secret correspondence became a bright spot in my life, a tentative connection to the family I had lost. 3 months after their visit, I received an unexpected call from Tyler. His voice was stiff with suppressed anger. "Emma told us she's been talking to you behind our backs." My heart sank. "She reached out to me, Tyler. I wasn't going to reject my own granddaughter." "Stay away from our children," he said coldly. "We'll be monitoring their communications from now on." The call ended abruptly, and with it my direct connection to Emma. The loss felt fresh again, a newly opened wound where scar tissue had begun to form. But rather than collapsing under this renewed rejection, I channeled my pain into purpose. I contacted my attorney and established 3 separate educational trusts for my grandchildren, structured so that the funds could only be used for college expenses and would be paid directly to their educational institutions. Stephanie and Tyler would have no access to this money, nor any control over its disbursement. I also expanded my volunteer work at the clinic, focusing particularly on mentoring younger nurses. Teaching them not just clinical skills, but emotional resilience gave my experience meaning. "Your pain can become your purpose," I told a young nurse struggling with a difficult patient. "The challenges you overcome are the very things that will make you exceptional at helping others." Margaret remained my rock throughout this period. Our Sunday coffee dates became sacred time, a space where I could be fully honest about my struggles without fear of judgment. "You know what I admire about you, Hattie," she said one afternoon as we watched the sunset from my terrace. "You've learned the difference between forgiveness and permission." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've forgiven them." Harold, Stephanie, Tyler. Not because they deserve it, but because carrying that anger was hurting you. But you haven't given them permission to continue treating you poorly. That's wisdom many people never achieve. Her words resonated deeply. I had indeed forgiven my family not out of some noble character trait, but out of self-preservation. Holding on to bitterness had only poisoned my own life. But forgiveness didn't mean allowing myself to be manipulated or used. It meant freeing myself from the past while protecting my present. 6 months after Stephanie and Tyler's visit, I started a support group specifically for grandparents estranged from their adult children and grandchildren. We met twice monthly in a community center near my home, sharing stories, offering comfort, and providing practical advice for navigating the complex legal and emotional landscape of family estrangement. Through this group, I found new purpose in helping others avoid financial exploitation by estranged family members, a sadly common occurrence. Establish boundaries around money early, I advised them. Financial support should never be tied to emotional access. The group grew, eventually attracting enough members that we had to move to a larger venue. Local media covered our work, and I was invited to speak at conferences about family estrangement. My pain had indeed become my purpose, my personal tragedy, transformed into a platform for helping others. Throughout this journey, I maintained the peaceful home I had created for myself. My garden flourished, my friendships deepened, and I found joy in simple pleasures. Morning walks along the beach, evenings spent reading on my terrace, weekends exploring the California coastline with Margaret and other friends. Was it the life I had imagined for myself when I held newborn Stephanie in my arms all those years ago? No. But it was a life of integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. I still kept photos of my grandchildren around my home, updated occasionally through social media glimpses. I still sent birthday cards to them through my attorney, knowing they might never receive them. I still held space in my heart for the possibility of reconciliation, however remote. But I had learned that waiting for others to complete my happiness was a recipe for perpetual disappointment. True joy came from living authentically, loving generously, and maintaining healthy boundaries. Lessons hard won through years of pain and healing. Life rarely gives us neat resolutions or perfect justice. Harold, who had caused so much pain, faced financial ruin, but would likely rebuild as I had done. Stephanie and Tyler continued their lives without my financial assistance, though I occasionally heard through mutual acquaintances that they had been forced to downsize their home and lifestyle. Emma, now unable to contact me directly, was preparing for college, perhaps one day, accessing the trust I had established without ever knowing its source. And I continued my journey not as a victim of rejection, but as a woman who had transformed her pain into strength, her loss into wisdom. The ocean outside my window remained a constant reminder of life's ebb and flow, the inevitable cycles of loss and renewal, pain and healing. In the end, the most valuable lesson I learned was this: our worth is not determined by those who reject us, but by the courage with which we rebuild our lives in the aftermath of loss. And sometimes the family we create through friendship and shared experience proves more loyal than the one we were born into. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between maintaining your self-respect and giving in to family pressure? What boundaries have you established to protect your emotional well-being while keeping the door open for genuine reconciliation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories of healing and transformation. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is never dependent on someone else's ability to recognize it.